Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Vocal Distancing, where we catch up with college play-by-play voices from around the country. My name's Adam Witten, and as a reminder, if you want to catch up on previous episodes, you can do so on our College Sports Now YouTube channel if you want to watch the video feed, or we have it as an audio podcast. Just look for College Sports Now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy your podcast. I want to introduce you to the trio that we're welcoming here on our latest edition. We have voices from the ACC, the SEC, and the Big Ten. And as we go around the horn with our introductions, I want to ask these guys the following question. Since we've been at home now, we're more than 2 months now into stay at home, safe at home, quarantine, whatever level of home restrictions that you're currently experiencing in your location. So I want to know, are there any unusual hobbies or skills that you have acquired, that you've attempted, things that you've picked up in your day-to-day life that you hadn't before? And so that's the first question I want to ask you guys. And let's begin in the SEC with the voice of the Texas A&M Aggies, Andrew Monaco. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Howdy, guys. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. For me, I've always been a reader when I travel. So I've had a lot more time to read. I've been fortunate to have a couple of partners who are also readers. So we're kind of exchanging books and book ideas and cooking more. I've also found out I need me time. And that's allowed me to walk every day for about an hour. And it's always been a part of the regiment, but I've tried to take it even farther and make sure that I do this every day, clearing the thoughts. Really giving me that opportunity to do that and think about a lot of things, and cooking. I come from an Italian family, an Italian mom, so I've always had that interest, and I have cooked in the past, but I don't think I've ever cooked more than I have now. So to me, I think that's why I have to walk. It's because I'm doing that a lot more also.
We're all cooking more at home, or trying to cook at home. We're all doing more dishes for sure. And I think, Andrew, if you're like me, you judge how well your day went by the number of walks that you took.
Yeah, I feel bad for all the dogs during this because, what started out, they were so happy to be walked by their owners. Now they have to be dragged because it's how many times can you do it? Every single time. But this comes down to a real simple philosophy for me. I cook because I like to eat. It's that simple. There's no deeper meaning to any of that. So I have enjoyed the time with the family. My daughter just finished her junior year. She'll be a senior in college. She's a softball player, so her season was cut short. So knowing that affected her. We've all been involved in that, but it affected her on the athletic level. My son, the work at home, he's living in Houston. So he's just south of here, and he's getting married in December. So, had to adjust those plans. Everything is still on plan, but being able to make sure that they have been safe. This is a nice little break. Sometimes we go, 1,000 miles an hour sometimes, depending on our schedules. This has been a nice pause. I know we all can't wait to get back to it, but this has been a nice pause and allow us to all, I think, appreciate things a lot more. Appreciate what we had, appreciate what's to come, and appreciate what's in front of us right now.
Very well said. All right, let's head north and go to the voice of the Orange out of the ACC, Syracuse, Matt Park. What's up, man?
Hey guys, what's happening with you? Thanks for having us on. It's good to have a little break in the monotony here during the pandemic, but I would echo a lot of the things that Andrew's talking about. You don't leave the house as much, and I like to eat, so I do what passes for cooking. I've always said I have a bachelor's fridge. If you can't drink it or spread it, I don't have it, but pour it out of a tube. But I've got a little better at that, and that's good. And then the one unusual thing that I have done scratches a couple of itches. Not that this would give you any indication, but I thought we were all going to have this, deal. We got to have better Zoom backgrounds, right? And so I was going to put some effort in on that. Now I've done 1 million Zooms, and I haven't done anything more than this poster. But the next pandemic, I'm gonna be there. And I love, we all got into sports because we love doing it. We love the venues. We love traveling around. So I've kind of killed 2 birds with 1 stone. And while some people have gotten into jigsaw puzzles, my goofy little time waster has been these
Oh, wow.
stadiums out of like
Out of Legos?
Legos.
Oh,
That's incredible.
that's
It's
cool.
a deal called Brixels, not to plug them, but that's the deal. You can get any stadium. The Kyle Field thing looks awesome. Anyway, I've done that one, and then I prefer to do baseball stadiums because they're not symmetrical and nooks and crannies. So I've done about 5 big league ballparks, and probably more to come if this thing drags on.
How many total for you?
I just finished Pittsburgh, so I've done San Francisco, Boston, Baltimore, and Pittsburgh in baseball. But I'll do once they arrive, I'll do Yankee Stadium and Wrigley Field, and my brother lives in DC, so I'll do his ballpark, and I try to customize them up. So that's a little geeky thing. For a while, I did it during the White House briefings. So while they're going on for an hour and a half of Q&A, I'm sitting there figuring out how these things go together. But in the end, I'll make a big backdrop here, have a better looking desk, and
that's really
office
cool.
to show for it.
That is.
That's really cool. How long does it take you to put one of those together?
Longer than I would like to admit.
Longer than one of the press briefings.
If you do dive in, I do have some tips and tricks that might save some time now that I've.
Very good. I think we have a spin-off series coming here very soon.
There you go.
All right, let's go to the Big Ten and introduce you to Brian Barnhart, voice of Illinois. How are you, sir?
Good. How are you doing, Adam?
We're good. We're good.
Guys.
So anything that can compete as far as Lego stadium builds?
Nothing like that. I did want to ask Matt about, our orange is pretty similar. Syracuse orange and Illini orange. So I'm just looking at that sign. That's it's pretty darn close.
Yeah, same thing. There's a lot of borrowing. I think the uniforms have looked similar over time too.
Yeah, that's right. No, I've been, the funny thing is that I don't think before March 1st, I even knew what Zoom was. I'd never heard of it. I don't know about you guys. And then we start doing this and I'm like, what is that? Isn't that like FaceTime or what is it? And so that's been a real interesting thing. We actually, a couple of weeks ago, I've got 2 daughters in college, one at grad school at the University of Chicago and another one that's going to the U of I, but we played Yahtzee over Zoom. I mean, that was interesting, to put the phone down where you're rolling the dice. And so that was pretty cool. My wife and I have done a lot of walking, which I know Andrew mentioned, just being out there. It's like, well, why not go for an hour walk instead of before, 15, 20 minutes was like, that's about all I've got time for. So that's been real cool to do that. And we started this last year, my wife and I, during the off season, we watched like Downton Abbey because I'd never seen it, watched every episode, kind of binge watched it. And so now we've had all kinds of time to binge watch. And I never watched, believe it or not, I don't know, I just didn't have time, or I'd never watched The Office. We'd recorded a bunch of them, and so we just started watching all of those. And then it's Law and Order, and it's Blue Bloods, and it's JAG. And so, it's kind of like, what do you want to watch tonight? And so it's been fun doing that. But you're right. I mean, you guys are both right. Mentioned you're going 100 miles an hour, and that's what was weird about this year was you're just getting to that crescendo in March that you've been building all year for. And we were sitting at the Big Ten tournament. I actually went to the tournament the first night because we weren't playing till Friday. We had a double bye. I just finished 4th in the conference. And suddenly I'm there doing a radio show on that Thursday morning, and they're like, it's over. We're going home. And that took me about 2 weeks to get over. I just, as you guys know, you build up that energy and momentum, and you've seen the team develop, and they're just about to take off. In this case, Illinois being back in the tournament where they used to be a mainstay all the time, to having been out of it now for 5 or 6 years, and the fans were really, really pumped. And then to have it in like that. So it took a while to adjust mentally, and then, now a chance to reflect a little bit and hope it all works out and gets ready to go here pretty soon.
Yeah. All right. Let me start with this. We got a lot of ground to cover here today as we learn a lot more about the 3 of you. But let's take the timeline back as far as we can here and keep it in the realm of sports. I want to know your favorite, or at least the most memorable, childhood moment in sports. So maybe it wasn't a great moment. Maybe it's just something that stuck with you because it was a painful, crushing loss that you experienced as a kid. And that's the one that you always think back to at first. But Matt, let's start with you. Your most memorable childhood sports moment or event.
Well, when you phrase it that way, it brings me to something that I wouldn't have thought of if you didn't say most memorable. But I remember starting off in Little League, we lost every game, I want to say, for the first 2 years. I think we eventually won. Billy Baldwin, who was like the 6'4", 10-year-old in our league, like we had a combined no-hitter to break out of the. It was probably with 18 walks too, but to finally break that losing streak. That's not what I was going to say to your original question, Adam. But my playing careers were never a standout in any way, shape, or form. But for me, just being a kid is just the magnitude of going to a major league sporting event or just being a young person coming to the Dome for a football or basketball game and just being blown away by the size of everything and the sound and the color and going to Yankee Stadium for the first time, walking out the tunnel and this green grass. To me, that's more gripping than anything. I couldn't tell you about wins and losses or games that I played. It wasn't good enough for any of that to be notable, but that's where I think the seeds are planted for what this now becomes our career, is just falling in love with those settings.
Andrew, what about you?
I'm going to reiterate. I think that connection when you get in a building is huge, and whether it is Yankee Stadium, I think that connection, you just don't get that if you're just watching. As a player, I remember a combined no-hitter. You remember you used to have the innings at that time, innings. Now it's pitches. You could pitch 6 innings in a week. I pitched the first 3, and Kenny, and for the life of me, I can't think of his last name. He pitched the last 3 and we caught. So we swapped. We threw a no-hitter in Little League, and making those all-star teams was always proud. It was one thing to wear your own uniform. When you got to wear that all-star uniform, that was always something. Memory as a fan, growing up in the Philadelphia area, Flyers were really the first winning team. That was exciting. I remember them beating the Russians. That was big. That was one of the few home games that was televised. So that was something special. And then it was that era growing up of the Phillies, the Flyers, and the Sixers, late 70s, get into the 80s. But Matt, I'm with you. I loved going to arenas. To this day, I still love game day. I still love campuses and stadiums and arenas, and you try to check mark. When I was in the NBA, I would check mark every time at the end of the shoot around. I had to make a basket before I left the floor. That's always been special. I think that connection is something special for a sports fan.
Brian, how about you?
Yeah, same thing. Played baseball growing up, wasn't very good at it, which is why I probably wound up broadcasting instead of playing or getting anywhere near playing it. Could pitch a little bit, pitched in some pretty exciting Little League games and Pony League games, but never really developed into anything. My brother was actually a 3-sport athlete in high school, so he was the star, and I was kind of the guy that just did good in school and stayed out of trouble. At least I tried to. And we grew up on a farm west of Tolono, Illinois, which is just south of Champaign. So my funnest, most fun memories, and these guys mentioned going to Illinois games as a kid, which is really what, if you grow up in the place where you wind up doing the games, and there was about a 20-year gap in between, and we'll probably talk about that later, but where I grew up here and went to Illinois games. Probably the most exciting game I saw in person was with my dad. Eddie Johnson hit a shot from the corner right down below us, behind the basket at then the Assembly Hall, and beat Irvin Johnson, Magic Johnson, and #1 Michigan State. The roar of the crowd was just unbelievable, and it stuck with me forever. And when you flash forward years ahead, I had a chance then. Illinois upset #1 Indiana. All those years later, back in 2013, Tyler Griffey took an inbounds pass with about 0.7 left and won the game at the buzzer, and I was able to call that game. What was cool about it was I was with my dad, and he was listening to the game on the radio that we beat Michigan State. I'm sitting next to him. And then all those years later, I'm doing the game when Illinois beats another #1 team, and he's got a different headset, but same idea, listening to the radio. So there's just great how that sports connection happens, how you grow up with it. And for me, I just feel really, really fortunate because I was a fan of the Illini. I've had a lot of different jobs over the years, but just those Illinois memories. When I got this job about 20 years ago, I mean, I grew up with this. This is who I am. And so it makes the job even, it's not just a job, it's a passion. So I think it's carried over all those years.
It's a really cool story. And let's talk about the career path that each of you took. And from the very beginning, I really enjoyed the answers to this question of take us back to the beginning, the first time you were on the air, when you first spoke into a microphone and you thought at least people were listening, when you first caught the bug for this business. Brian, we'll do this snake draft style for this question because I unearthed something that I want to bring up on my virtual background. So for anybody that is not watching, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to go find the YouTube channel for this, but I want to see if I can find this here.
Oh, wow. Oh my goodness.
You know what? It's all right. So let's use that as our background here, and let's get into the start of your career, which had a lot to do with baseball. And
yeah, no, somebody told me years ago I look like John Elway right there. I think they might be right, but no, I don't know where
the contract. You didn't have the same contract, did you?
No, I didn't. Yeah, I don't know where you found that. It's in some media guide somewhere, I guess.
That was from your AAA game team in Oklahoma, right?
Oklahoma City, yeah.
Yeah, and
that's right.
It was in their media guide. This was a story I found that because you went to Liberty University, right?
I did.
Mm-hmm. There was I unearthed this video that they put together, a profile about you, and they had some images of pictures of you early in your career. And so I found this. I said, we'll let this be the setting for the story that you're going to tell. So let's hear kind of the early days of your career.
Well, it's funny because I grew up, as I mentioned, just south of Champaign. So I got to hear a lot of Illini announcers. Jim Turpin did the games here for 30, 40 years. Larry Stewart was before him, and Dick Martin, who just passed away, he did some of the games, and Wayne Larrabee did some. And there were several networks. There wasn't just one network, 35 years ago. There were several different guys that did it. But so I kind of knew what announcers sounded like, although I was one of the biggest introverts ever in high school. So it's funny when I went to my first high school reunion 10 or 15, 20 years after high school, people were like, "You do what?" Because I never talked. I never said anything. And I didn't really even think about being an announcer of any kind. It never even entered my mind. I mean, I enjoyed listening to Jack Buck and Harry Carey and White Sox announcers, and you get them all here in the Midwest. But I actually went to Liberty to be a history teacher. I didn't know. I mean, I just loved history. I still do. I actually host a show now in Champaign for a couple of hours every morning. And all that history I read back then really comes to be a benefit because I can just remember things that I read, and I still read a lot of history books. My daughters tease me to this day about my big, thick, boring history books that I read. But it was a passion of mine. I didn't know what else I was going to do. And then I got to campus, and they had it was a very small school. Liberty University at the time was only about 10 years old. Probably had 2,000 or 3,000 students. With a lot of red mud everywhere. And now it's a beautiful campus. If you've ever been there or seen it, I mean, it looks totally different. But went there, there was a friend of mine who his goal in life, his name was Mike Tilley. He wanted to be the voice of the North Carolina Tar Heels. He loved Woody Durham. He would listen to tapes of Woody call Carolina games over and over and over again. And that's who he wanted to be. And so he would practice games on the campus station and say, "Hey, I need a color guy. Do you want to do it with me?" And I'm like, "Sure. I can pretend. I can talk basketball for a little bit." And as it turned out, the more we did it, and we just sit in the stands with a tape recorder, and people were looking around like, what are these guys doing? And I just fell in love with it. I was like, "You mean you can actually make a living doing this?" As I found out in those early days, the more I did it, they really didn't pay you very much to do that. But I got great experience. I did a lot of games when nobody was paying any attention, made a lot of mistakes, had a very high-pitched voice still. I've got tapes on cassette that I played for my daughters in the last couple of years. They're like, "Dad, is that you? It doesn't even sound like you." So I was 17, 18 years old, but I got on the campus station. Long story short, I switched majors, went into radio, got on the campus station. church affiliation there. There was another church station, WRVL. I did some sports for them. Jerry Edwards did the Liberty University, Liberty Baptist College Flames for a long time. He was kind of my mentor. And the more I did it, the better I got. And eventually, when I graduated, actually the day I graduated from Liberty University, I was working for the Lynchburg Mets, single A team for the Mets. And I was their backup announcer. And the regular announcer, his name was Frank Atkinson, who did Omaha Royals games for several years. But he had to go do TV. And so I literally left my graduation commencement early, ran to City Stadium in Lynchburg and broadcast an exhibition game between the Lynchburg Mets. And as it wound up that year, I think the New York Mets, were in the World Series, or at least they were competitive. So it was just a great experience. Did their games filling in for about a year. Then went to Salem, Virginia for a year, won a league championship there the first year. I just kept sending out tapes. One of my goals they asked me was, what do you want to do? I said, well, I want to be a major league announcer, Major League Baseball announcer. And they were saying, my goal, what would your goal be? I said, I want to be there when I'm 25. And I'm like, I've got no clue, how hard it is to get a job like that. They don't hand those out. Yeah. And so I sent out tapes. I wound up getting hired by Jim Weigel, whose claim to fame is he created the San Diego Chicken, and he signed Ozzie Smith to a contract in San Diego. Went to work for him in Oklahoma City and wound up doing their games with the picture you saw there for about 8 years. Eventually did college basketball at Oklahoma Baptist University. I did television. This is a great short story. I'll give it short. In Oklahoma City on television, they broadcast Oklahoma City University games on the local cable channel, where I got paid about $25 a game. But my color man that I did the games with was Chris Harrison, who was a student at Oklahoma City, who's now the host of The Bachelor at the time, and worked with him and met Joe Buck along the way. Part of the deal was in Oklahoma City, I was the engineer and the color guy and the play-by-play. And Joe would come down. He was in Louisville at the time and sit in with me and do some innings. And so you get to meet a lot of really cool people. I wound up going to Anaheim in 1998, got hired by the Angels, replaced Bob Starr. In 1998, did the games there 2 years, and then moved back to Champaign when my contract was out, and been doing the Illini ever since. So hopefully that wasn't too long an answer for you, but that kind of gives
it's quite a journey. And yeah, I mean, you did make it. You did make it to the big leagues with the Angels, as you just said there at the end. So, and Andrew, where did it all get started for you?
I had a teacher in high school by the name of Robert Metzger. He worked at NBC in the 60s and was able to get all their old equipment. When they upgraded equipment, Metz was able to get the equipment for his English class in high school. And he set up his own television studio. And we would do broadcasts of, usually it was basketball. It was harder to do football. Closed circuit, if you would, and we would do them on tape. But we learned audio. We learned how to script writing. It's a great class. And throughout that class, he would bring in Pete Silverman, who was at Prism at the time in Philadelphia, and would go on to Madison Square Garden. I'd work with Pete later, which was neat. A young Mike Emmerich would come in and talk with us. And that, I think, is where the bug was, to get that hands-on experience. And then the opportunity to go to Maryland, because they had a broadcast journalism, worked radio there. And my first job was the host for lacrosse. And talk about baptism by fire, I remember that I think the interview was 5 minutes. It had to be 3 minutes. So you put it on the Scully, you make sure that the razor is sharp, you get the tape, and that's how I learned to edit tape back then. Just that was awesome, I think, to be able, you kind of earned your place by being a host, and then you did color, and then you did play-by-play. So for me, it was lacrosse, it was football, it was men's basketball, it was women's basketball, and you learned to appreciate all of that. And you had the Brad Nesslers of the world coming in because he was doing Georgia Tech, and you had Johnny Holiday there at Maryland, who actually paid for us to go to the NCAA tournament. We had run out of money. He heard us talking to our station, said, "How much do you guys need?" Wrote us a check and allowed us to continue in the NCAA, because college radio stations could do it at the time. And,
Yeah.
Always appreciative of him doing that. And he's been a great friend, and absolutely love Johnny. Then I went to Atlantic City because I heard a guy who was 2 years ahead of me in school. He was leaving to go to TV, and I called the sports director. And that Tuesday I got that job, thinking I'm going to be there. I'm eventually going to take over the sports director. I think I got hired in October. They changed format, and I was blown out by May. So I knew exactly what radio was like, because if you haven't been fired, you haven't worked if you haven't worked overnights, and if you haven't been fired, you haven't worked in radio. Sent me to Washington, Pennsylvania, where best decision I ever made, got married then. And then to Orlando. And I was doing mornings in Orlando. Chris Russo had just left for New York. And the station there hired an afternoon talk show host and a morning sports. I did morning sports. I would find out later, I wasn't there a year, that the Magic brought their basketball, the broadcasting rights in-house. They were with Bud Sports the first year. I met with them, talked with them. I would learn later that one of the vice presidents would drive his kids to elementary school and would listen to the morning sports. They liked my voice. One of the kids' names was Andrew. He's my, third favorite Andrew after my son. And then I joined and became the broadcast coordinator for the Magic. Magic bought the Orlando Twins at the time, so doing the Magic, hosting on radio, able to do baseball in the summer, and we split those games. I eventually ended up doing the road games, but David Steele, still there with the Magic, and Chip Carey were doing home games, and I would sit in on there and do the road games. That gave me that opportunity. I would then leave. Pat Williams would ask me, if you remember Orlando going for that expansion team at the time, did not get it. I then transitioned, because I wanted to do more play-by-play. I transitioned to minor league baseball at that time. Cubs took us over. So that allowed me to do the play-by-play. It also allowed me to get my foot into television at the time, because I had that off season with Sunshine Network. And I was very, very happy at that time. I'm so glad to have done both. And I think I really love doing both. They're different rhythms, different styles to both. I was also very pleased because I got a chance to work with the young Charles Davis at the time. And we both came in the business together. Brian, as you were saying, you learn together, you make mistakes together. But I think, I've also said, if you've worked in minor league baseball, I think you can work anywhere. And that's in maybe all the jobs in minor league baseball, because it's constant. And there are some nights you're thinking, oh man, is anybody listening? And there's nights, if I just pull the plug, will anybody know? But you just meet so many great people there. And so with the Magic there, I went back to the Magic, and then it's fortunate because both the Magic and the Spurs organizations for me had WNBA and hockey. The Orlando had the Miracle came in '99, but they had the Solar Bears come in, and Don Waddell was the GM, and he was a great person to teach Orlando hockey, to tell you the truth, but just a really good hockey person. And that led me to San Antonio as well, because they were going to do the same thing with an AHL franchise, but also the WNBA. And I think I've been blessed with really good directors of broadcasting. I've been really fortunate with really good producers. And for me, the style was less is more. And also there's this, I've had directors of broadcasting, when you have an idea, they say, go try it. And instead of getting, let's say it didn't work, instead of saying, oh, don't ever do that again. I've had two of them that said, try it this way. If you do it maybe in this style, I always appreciated that. I think I had guys who not only knew the game, but I think they understood the broadcasting aspect of it. So, I've been fortunate to work with some great organizations. And then to be here at Texas A&M is even better. I have thought about the number of partners that I've worked with, and there is a ton. Some have moved on. Some have gotten out of the business. I don't know if that was my fault, but I have appreciated each and every one of them for making me a better broadcaster. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's we all have people that have helped us along the way, whether it's mentors, partners, support. Nobody in this business gets there on their own.
Nope.
Not even close. So Matt, let's hear it, man. What are the early days of your career?
Yeah, I mean, literally going back to your first question, the first time you ever put a headset on was in high school. I was probably a sophomore or junior in high school. And like a lot of small towns in America, there was that station that goes around and does all the high school games for a given region or conference. And WMCR in Oneida, New York, which is 30 minutes from where I am right now, just east of Syracuse. They did all the games in our high school league and got to know those guys a little bit, basically just by showing up and wanting to be a fly on the wall, but then trying to make myself useful. They would come do a high school football game at our school, and I'd sit there with my clipboard and I would keep the stats. And so, rushed for, and I'd read them back on the air at halftime. Well, Brian Lucy threw, 2 passes complete out of 8 for 14 yards, and Rusty Dean ran for 24 yards on 6 carries. And, as you guys know, now we've all done it a million times, but the first time you even hear yourself coming back on the air takes some getting used to, and you're nervous as heck. And there probably were, 4 people listening, if that, and 3 of them were in the booth with us, So that just kind of plants the seed. Those guys called games that we would have played in. So, I could basically play in a high school baseball game and go swing by the broadcast if I wanted to at the same time, or maybe pick up a different game that I wasn't playing on the weekends. And once I got into college, I would, do some more stuff with them and kind of learn by trial and error. For me, with, the school, for what I wanted to do for a living, being in my backyard, there was really no choice for me. And the Syracuse experience is something that I owe my career to, the WAER and getting an opportunity to call Syracuse football, basketball, lacrosse while we were here. And then the same as the other guys, baseball was my thing. We did New York Penn League baseball after our junior year of college. And then my first job was in the South Atlantic League. I actually left school early in my senior year of college. By that time, I had jiggered my course schedule to be such a way that I had 1 class in my spring semester of senior year. It met 1 day a week, and it was taught by the dean. So when I called him up and said in, I think, February, I said, hey, I've got a job. I need to leave in March. It was basically like, hey, I'm not going to hold you back. We'll figure out the rest. And went to the Phillies Class A affiliate in the South Atlantic League, and I was there for 2 years and did UNC Greensboro basketball in the winters. And then after a couple of years of that, I went to the Cubs AA team, which by then Andrew had moved from Orlando and bounced around. It was in Jackson, Tennessee at that time. I was there for 4 years, and in the off seasons did small time college football, basketball on radio, on TV, wherever they would have me, and always kind of kept my ear to the ground about what was possible to come back here. I almost came back here a year prior to when I actually did. But as it worked out, I came back in the fall of '02, did a couple of years as the pre and post game host and analyst type on football, basketball, did lacrosse play-by-play. And then after a couple of years of that, my partner, then Mark Johnson, moved on to Colorado, and he's still there as the play-by-play voice, and I've been here ever since as the play-by-play voice. So a lot of years, the time flies, but that's the synopsis of it.
All right, let me ask you guys. I'm gonna do this next question in 2 parts. Just we are running a little short on time, and I want to make sure we get a chance to ask as many questions as possible. So let me ask you 2 for 1 here. And Matt, we'll start with you on this one as we go reverse snake draft here. Most memorable game you've called, and this can be at Syracuse or not at Syracuse, and then best athlete you've ever covered. And I'll ask the same question to Andrew and then to Brian, but Matt, we'll start with you.
Sure. The first game one is a question we get asked a lot. Easy answer for me. The stock answer is the 6 overtime game between Syracuse and Connecticut in the Big East tournament in 2009, which was just epic. It had all the makings of, 2 good teams, Madison Square Garden, win or, go home and get ready for the NCAA tournament, that type of thing. But the drama of being the 9 o'clock tip-off at the world's most famous arena is a starting point. And then the great rivalry, the coaches, and then the game just kept going and going. And, those of us have called as many games as the three of us or four of us have, you're going to have a few that you can rattle off, but that one will be hard to top, just for the camaraderie that it built in the building that night, the energy, etc. Best athlete, could go probably a lot of different ways. I've seen a lot of, guys that went on to play big league baseball or whatever, but again, hard to beat Carmelo Anthony for a 1-year season in college basketball, lifting his team to the national championship. And he was such an interesting guy. He was 18 years old, and he was very not impressed by himself, I would say, over the course that nothing was a big deal to him. So interviewing him was always interesting. We called it the Carmelo Anthony rodeo. If you could stay on for 60 seconds, you won. Like, he just didn't really have that much to say because he didn't think it was that big a deal that he scored 30 points and had 15 rebounds in the national semifinal in front of 75,000 people. And so really unique, and he's been back and kept in touch with the university, so that's been cool to see.
Hey, before I get to Andrew and Brian, I want to ask you a quick follow-up, Matt, since you brought up Melo. One of the coolest pieces of content that I've seen in this era of COVID shutdown is the watch party that Syracuse did and you hosted for the 2003 national championship game, and Melo was involved in that. Can you give us a little bit of a peek behind the curtain into how that came together and what that experience was like?
Yeah, sure. It was just something I thought was worth the time. And we're going back, I don't know what date it was exactly when we did it, but it was like, gee, we got nothing better to do. Everybody's sitting at home. They've been starting to rerun a lot of these games to create some content on the networks. And I had heard somewhere along the line that game was in the schedule for CBS Sportsnet, maybe a week in advance. And so I kind of ran it up the flagpole at work. I said, hey, how about we maybe do a show? We get some of the guys back together. And it just kind of snowballed. My first call was to Jerry McNamara and, hey, man, need you to do this. Oh, I don't really like doing that. I got a lot of distractions around the house. I said, hey, we can't really do this if you don't participate. Okay, well, I'll do it if you need me. So then kind of worked on a bunch of my media friends and, fan alumni types, fingers crossed we could certainly lean on Coach Boeheim to get some contribution from his house. And then Julie Boeheim really is the MVP. Our basketball sports information director, Pete Moore, did a nice job getting a couple of the guys that I didn't have contact for. But number one, we just said, okay, we're going to put a camera in the Boeheim household, and whatever we get's a bonus. If Coach really wants to participate, fantastic. If he doesn't, we'll maybe lean on him for a minute here or there, and we'll just hope for the best. He was on basically the whole time. And then Julie kind of took my passive-aggressive hints and ran to Carmelo, and she got Melo in. So, and that was a surprise even to me. I said to a couple of people I was working with producing it, I said, look, if somehow we get Melo on this, let's have it be a surprise to everybody. So we didn't promote with his name. We had all these other names. But then I'm watching, you guys know how Zoom works, obviously, and I'm watching the participant thing come up, and here it is, Melo 7 or whatever shows up in the participants. So then it was on. And so one of the guys in the room with me, Scott Hecht, our director of the athletics productions, he's watching the viewer count. Oh, it's 500, it's 800, it's 1,200, it's 3,500, it's 4,000. Because once he was in there, he added a lot and did it just from sitting on his couch wherever he was. So very appreciative of Melo for doing that, and obviously for Julie, she's a saint.
That's so cool. Andrew, you're up, man.
The LSU 7 overtime game.
Yeah.
And when Matt was talking
You're
about
one-upping me.
you reminded me of, though, Matt, when you said by playing that game at 9 o'clock. I remember that, and that game that you're talking about, everybody's talking about that at that time. And I remember checking Twitter because that was a night game at Kyle, and my entire Twitter feed, that's all it was that game. And you kind of know, oh my gosh, we're getting into, this is really fun. We're getting into history type part there. And I'm proud that you can follow that game. You want to become a fan and just watch. And it was after the third overtime. Kendrick Rogers makes a great catch. It was interference, but he caught it anyway. Then he catches the 2-point conversion. We go to the fourth. And my family is in the booth with me, and I turn to them while Dave Elmendorf is talking, and I just mouth, wow. And that was just the third overtime, and you keep going. And I still listen to that when there's a replay, and there's things that I still forget, and it's nice to hear again. That one was a lot of fun. Athlete, you know, when I was in Orlando with the Sun Rays, the first time I realized that you could see a player who had it, and that was Chuck Knobloch, who was the second baseman. It's so interesting looking back that he was from A&M. Ron Gardenhire was our manager from Texas, and they would just battle, all in good fun. But he knew that Nobby was going to Minnesota, and he went quick. He didn't even spend the whole year. Favorite athlete? Manu Ginobili of the Spurs. I'm telling you, he wears the emotions on his sleeve. He's just a good person. You meet him once, he knows you forever. I just enjoyed every moment with Manu. Very
cool. Brian, you've called games at from the biggest stages of football and basketball at the collegiate level, but what are you going with?
Yeah, it's hard. I've been fortunate, you know, we were in a Rose Bowl, which you grew up watching as a kid, and you're looking around going, wow, we're really doing this game? This is incredible. Same thing when you think about the Final Four in 2005, the national title game. You just going through your mind, you're just like, oh my gosh, this is a game I watched all my life, and here it is. And you're a little bit of for all the games I had done by then, even in 2005, I'm like, this is unbelievable. So those are very memorable. But the game I get asked about all the time, which, you know, I speak to U of I students all the time, and they're all now, they were barely born when a lot of this happened. But the Arizona game in the Elite Eight in Chicago at Allstate Arena, it's the loudest building I've ever been in my life. It was all Illinois fans, a little pocket of Arizona fans. We had been 29-0, undefeated to start the year. We lose at Ohio State on a last-second jumper. We win the Big Ten tournament. We roll through the first rounds of the NCAA. We're in Chicago, chance to go to the Final Four, down 15, biggest deficit all year with 4 minutes to go. And we somehow, I still don't know how we did it. I watched the replay of it. I can't believe it. We recently replayed the audio part. It's still, and even though it's me, I realize it's me calling the game. I still get chills thinking, how in the world do we even do this? But they rallied. D. Brown had a bunch of steals. Darren Williams hit an unbelievable shot to tie it at 80. The roar of the crowd. I mean, and what was on the line, the season we had, all that went into it. That's still the greatest game I've ever called in my life for what was on the line. The Final Four was obviously a dream opportunity, but getting to the Final Four, just what happened in Chicago that day. Darren Williams shot as a gift. Somebody blew up a Sports Illustrated poster from behind Darren of that shot with the crowd reaction and everybody doing this and waving, sticking their hands up for a three. And I mean, that's probably the greatest game. Favorite athletes over the years, I watched D. Brown, which was on that team. He was like Moses. Everybody loved him from 5-year-olds to 90-year-olds. They loved D. Brown. They wore their headbands. He's probably the most dynamic personality I've ever been around. Although Ayo DeSumo this year, with what the big shots he made game after game, was incredible to watch. And he'll be remembered by a lot of Illini fans too. And then probably the best that I've ever seen at what he does was Mariano Rivera for the Yankees. When he was in the game was over. I mean, when I was working for the Angels, I mean, you went into the 8th or 9th innings and he was in, you was like, okay, when's the bus start? I mean, it was over. He just threw that little cutter and you couldn't get to him. And as I learned more about him, I was so impressed with him as a person and who he was. And his all the things he does for in his homeland and for charity and everything else. But probably the best I've ever seen of what he does is him, Mariano Rivera.
Adam, I want to add, going to school at the same time as Len Bias and to see what he did from freshman year. I mean, it's tragic and sad. He was unbelievable. He was absolutely unbelievable. And the ACC at that time was also unbelievable. It was one of the reasons why I went there. I'd seen Cole Fieldhouse growing up. So that was the first place I visited on my campus visit. Len Bias was an unbelievable athlete. It was a joy to watch him. It was a tragedy how it ended.
Yeah, I mean, we never got to see what he would have been in the NBA, but people regard him the way they did Michael Jordan from the ACC when he was playing, and maybe even better in terms of just a college player. He was that incredible.
One
All
of
right.
the upsides of this, though, is to watch the replays of all those games. They just reran again all the Jordan infatuation lately. There was a game, Jordan versus Bias, and you're thinking, I mean, these are two of the greatest ever. I mean, obviously Bias cut short, but he would have done great things in the NBA too.
And if you ever doubted Michael, the dunk at the end of that game at Cole Fieldhouse shows you what Michael, there was the trajectory. But the joke was the guy who held Michael under 20 points was Dean Smith, but that was the North Carolina system. But Lenny flat out blossomed as a player throughout his career.
Yeah. All right, guys. I want to ask you one more question. We've talked a lot about your careers, but I think we started this on our last episode, and it's been fun to recount some of the details of you guys getting to the point you are in your profession. And you can hear throughout this entire episode that we've done, the joy and the passion that you have for where you are right now. So tell us about the moment, recount as many details as you can about the moment you found out you were going to be the voice of your program. Andrew, you're laughing and smiling already. So
I'm laughing because the person who you can't see on here, Tom Bowman, has a big part in it.
Yeah, well, this was what, about almost 2 years ago now that it happened?
It's coming up on 2 years now.
Yeah.
And maybe with Tom from Learfield IMG College, looking back very early in the process, having a very unofficial, off the record type conversation with him for about an hour. He was so kind for that time. Made me even more excited. Look, these jobs don't open up. It took 33 years for this one to open up. So you knew. And what's also interesting is John Heike was a friend of mine, but from Fox Sports Southwest. He had been here at Texas A&M and is an Aggie, and had told me that it was going on. So very excited. And then you go through the process. And as you get closer, had made the final three. I'm finishing up with the Spurs. The timeline goes a little bit farther than what was initial. So I finish up with the Spurs. We lose to the Warriors. And I had the feeling that was going to be the last time of the Spurs, but you never know. It comes up to the decision time, and one of the final three drops out. And I get a call. It's like there was something that was said, some reassuring this and that. And I thought, well, if one guy dropped out, my chances just got better. Now it's 1 out of 2. So I like it just went up. It's 50-50 now. And then on Friday, I'm told that there will be a decision on Monday. We'll let you know what our decision is on Monday. And I am just fretting that entire weekend.
Yeah.
Monday, we have a conference call, and I'm kind of told I got it, but I'm not sure. They kind of blew past the you got the job into what was next in the details of it. So when they finally say, I believe Tom interrupted the GM at the time and said, are you going to tell him? My family, my office door is closed. My family, as I find out later, their ears are pressed up against the door. They tell me I get it. I say, is this where I say, whoop? That's when they go crazy. I hear this big commotion in the back. You have to understand, my son is a fighting Texas Aggie, graduated class of 2018, so he's going at the time. Tom was then kind enough to call me afterwards and congratulate me. Doug Walker, who was here at the time, also did the same thing. For me, it felt like I had made it. I had always been the number 2 somewhere. I'd always been the fill-in to get this opportunity. And I truly believe, Brian, just like you at Illinois, and Matt, just like you at Syracuse, these aren't everyday jobs. They're special jobs. There's only so many of these in the country. And I think that's why I went at it so hard to be a part of the history and the radio network and all of it. So to me, the proudest moment for me in the broadcasting career, and knowing all that it takes, and to be the Aggies, and they could not have welcomed me anymore. We had coaches nights and so many people coming up and wishing me well. And the 12th Man Foundation had their summer meetings. I've never been welcomed like this any other place. So probably my proudest moment.
That's really cool. And congratulations on the upcoming 2-year anniversary of it sounds like they buried the lead a little bit in the conversation.
Sort of. Yeah, kind of. Yeah. But I love the way it ended. You know, that's for sure. I love the ending. So
yeah. Brian, what about you?
Well, mine was a little more gradual because I had been in California with the Angels, and my contract was up, and we had 2 play-by-play guys. They wanted to have a color guy, and so I moved back. I thought, well, I can be unemployed in California, or I can go back home and be unemployed. And so I came back home and started working applied at the local radio station. A guy that I went to my high school was the general manager, and it was funny. I'll never forget. I called him up, and then he left a message, and he called back, and he goes, I don't have anything for you, but you're hired. And so we'll figure out something for you to do. And at the time, you know, the station, we weren't actually, Learfield was producing our games. We weren't actually part of Learfield yet as far as an affiliation. So the university actually owned the rights to the games. So it was kind of gradual. The Jim Turpin, who I mentioned earlier, had been doing the games a long time, and he started having some health issues that year. And I had just got back from California. This was in the year 2000. And so the first football game of the year, my general manager says, hey, by the way, Illinois would like you to fill in for Jim Turpin, who also worked at our station, because he's not able to make the trip. And it was a game at San Diego State. I had just come from the West Coast. And like 3 months later, my first Illinois game, and one of the sports information directors, I'll never forget it, she said, by the way, do you feel like this might be an audition? And I'm like, oh, great. Thanks. You know, thanks for that pressure.
I do now.
I do now. And I went out there, and it's funny, over these years, I've never really worked a game without a spotter, but I didn't have one for that game. And wouldn't you know it, it's at night at now Qualcomm Stadium, or Jack Murphy Stadium at the time. And I'm doing it with Jim Grabowski, who is an Illinois Hall of Famer and, you know, NFL and big Illinois star and MVP of the Rose Bowl in the 60s. And I'm doing the game with him. So A, I'm nervous to begin with. B, I'm thinking this actually, it might be an audition, and I don't have a spotter. And of course, San Diego State comes out with dark numbers, or dark jerseys with red numbers, and the lighting was really bad. And I'm thinking, this is going to be a nightmare. And I got through it okay, and I thought it was okay. I mean, I thought I can do a lot better than this, but they loved it. They thought, hey, you did a great job. You know, certainly Jim's thinking about retiring in a couple of years. We can have you use you on the pregame show and halftime and do those sorts of things. And as it turned out, Jim did retire a couple of years later. I filled in for him in some games. Illinois won a share of a Big Ten title under Bill Self. I filled in for Jim in that game at the barn in Minneapolis. So it was kind of, I got eased into the job. So there really wasn't one big moment where he said, okay, you're hired. It was kind of a gradual process that when Jim stepped down, they basically said, hey, we'd like you to be our play-by-play voice. And of course, all these years I did minor league baseball in Lynchburg, Virginia, and Salem, Virginia, and Oklahoma City. I did minor league hockey. And then with the Anaheim Angels, when I got to Anaheim, I thought this is going to be my job. Like Andrew mentioned, this is my job for the next 20 years, you know, and didn't work out that way. But it turned out even better when I got back home to eventually become the voice of the Illini. And I never dreamed I'd have the job. I didn't think I'd ever be back in town. When I went away to Liberty University, I thought I'll never be back. As they say, the Lord works in mysterious ways, as they say, to get me from there to Oklahoma to California and back. The timing was fantastic. But that first game at San Diego State, I was a nervous wreck. And I thought, this is my one chance. I'm probably either going to get it or have a shot to get it in the future or not. And fortunately, they liked it. And then years later, of course, we lined up with Learfield and got to know Tom and Keith and all the guys there at Learfield. And so it's been a great relationship. But I'll just never forget that first game. That was, I felt not only was it pressure to do a good job, but I felt and these guys would know this, you feel an obligation to the fans. You don't want to let them down. You want to do a good job. And fortunately, I did.
Brian, have you ever sat back? You talked about the story about being with your dad, the big game, and then your dad listening to you. Have you ever sat back and now you are the soundtrack for Illini fans?
Yeah, where I get that is when I talk to U of I students, and, you know, I'll speak to the class, a journalism class or a broadcast class, and they'll be like, oh yeah, I grew up listening to you. And I get a lot, I don't know, you guys probably get mail, email, or different thing from fans saying, you know, your calls of the game mean so much to me. I mean, as we're doing this, we're trying to do a good job, but you don't realize the impact that you have on people who, you know, love the play-by-play of their team and the excitement you bring to the games. And, you know, I know this is always the compliment, and you guys have probably heard this too. You know, hey, we no disrespect to the TV guys, but they turn it down and they listen to us because they want that hometown Illini feel. And I've had people over the years say, hey, when I hear your voice, I know it's an Illini game. I don't need to figure out who we're playing. I know it's Illinois. And so that's really that's a great feeling. I love that feeling, that because that's all, you know, I get to go to the games. I always tell people I get to go to the games. I get paid to have a great seat and to watch all these games night after night and kind of watch history unfold. And so, yeah, that you're right, Andrew. It's a great feeling when somebody mentions that. It also makes you realize, wait a minute, have I really been doing this that long? I mean, these kids were 3 or 4 years old when you know, some of these games happened when I started, and now they're adults. And that's pretty cool feeling though.
There's nothing more sobering with I grew up with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I still think the coolest thing that you can see as a broadcaster is if, like, you're looking around Kyle Field or you're looking around the Dome and you see somebody wearing their headphones, listening to the game as they're watching it at the stadium. That's almost like an indirect compliment that you can pay to the voice of a program. Matt, all right, be our Mariano Rivera here and close this out.
Yeah, Brian's already set that up. I don't know if I've got his stuff. You know, for me, it was the same type of thing. It wasn't like an overnight kind of deal. I was already here. Syracuse called me a year before I ever actually came, and we talked about a position where maybe I would do basketball color and lacrosse play-by-play. And they ended up kind of pulling the plug on that because they had an opportunity for a former player to be analyst, which had really never happened here before. And so that went for another year. And then Dave Pasch was one of our predecessors here, and he left he'd started to get more ESPN work, but had been named the radio voice of the Arizona Cardinals. So that's what took him out of here. And at that time, they had 2 jobs open, really, or, you know, we were all gunning for the play-by-play job. And I was, you know, I'll be frank, was disappointed to have not gotten the play-by-play job kind of out of the box. Would have been a little young. I think that was kind of what they cited at the time. You know, it was kind of a reason for going Mark, who does a really good job and has an incredible sound in his own right. And so we worked the 2 years together. And I know Mark was interested in getting back to the West, and he kind of had his irons in the fire there. And I remember where I was when I was called. Mark, I must have given me an email or some sort of heads up at the time. And then Chris Ferris, who's Tom's counterpart from the ISP, IMG background, Chris called, and I was, at that year, this is 2004, I was doing the Binghamton Mets games. So David Wright was our top player at the time, and I was on the road in Erie, Pennsylvania. And so it was getting close to game time, and I got it must have been like an email from Mark, hey, Chris is going to call you, and that kind of thing. And you don't know at the time what it's about, but Chris calls and spills the beans quickly. And that was obviously very exciting and an incredible rush of adrenaline, because you feel like, hey, I've achieved this career goal and get this promotion, and man, this is exciting. And then your wheels start spinning on all the things that now come with that and what you're responsible for and what you want to do. So I'm sure I you know, my brain was elsewhere while calling the baseball game that night, but I probably had a little more adrenaline and energy in my voice. And you know, I was, to me, like the way I communicated that to my family, I remember pretty much immediately I sent flowers to my mom, you know, like that was my sort of way of passing the news along. And you know, you got to thank the people that have supported you. When I was eating Chef Boyardee for the first 6 years of my professional career, and living with, you know, 3 other guys on air mattresses in an apartment, that's the kind of stuff that you're kind of graduating out of at that time. And you got to thank the people that help you along the way. So that was a real thrill to do.
I appreciate you guys sharing not just that story, but all the stories that you've shared here today. We're glad that all of you are doing great things for your fans, and it seems that everyone is doing okay and staying healthy right now. And we certainly hope that we get to hear your voices a lot more when we get closer to football season this fall. So, Brian Barnhart from Illinois, Andrew Monaco from Texas A&M, and Matt Park from Syracuse. Guys, we really appreciate the time. Stay well, and we'll talk to you here soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, guys.
Yep. Be well, guys. Take care.
Pleasure.